I want to welcome you back to Enemy of My Truth. And in this week's episode, Heather and I sit down for a raw, vulnerable conversation all about the spiritual side of divorce, the kind that shakes your identity, cracks you open, and forces you to confront parts of yourself that you didn't know were hiding. We're sharing pieces of our own journeys, what it looked like to walk through the shame, the guilt, the grief, and the unexpected clarity and healing that comes when you finally tell yourself the truth. If you're in the middle of a divorce, contemplating one, or just feeling lost in your relationship, let this conversation perhaps be a bit of a guidepost. You're not alone. We've been there, and we're so glad that you're here with us now. Let's dive in. Hey, Heather, how you doing?
Good, Anne. Good to be back. Good to see you.
I know, great to see you. Always great to see you. So, we had this conversation come up the other day, and it was around the area of divorce and around both of our individual divorces. And the theme that I see with so many of my clients that there's this unspoken energy, when you're outside of the lawyers, and for some people going to court and going through all the mediation, what we're going through on the spiritual side, this spiritual divorce, and what it means for each of us. And it's one of those silent processes that we all go through, but nobody really talks about. And I think because there's so much for me at the time of my divorce, almost 14 years ago, I just had so much shame and not a sense of who I was during that time. And so many people go through divorce, yet it's one of the most isolating things that we go through. So we had some questions come in from clients and listeners that I thought you and I could go through today as you'll ask me. And I want to kind of create this dialogue with you, Heather, over our individual experiences and just share what we've been through and perhaps how we see ourselves today through that process. But I'm just really glad you're here and to kind of jump into what this conversation's all about around the spiritual divorce.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. And I think my divorce is a little newer than yours. I was divorced last year, but I guess it's been 2 years since
Mhm.
we separated and then divorced. And one thing I will say is my divorce was really, you know, done in a very loving manner. Like there was not a lot of contention. There was not a lot of, and I know there was anger, but it wasn't like a very contentious divorce. So for me, what I'm going to talk about today is that side of divorce. And I know there are lots of divorces that are not as nice as my divorce was, but I do think there's a lot of interesting things to talk about because you're probably going through the same emotions, but there's still a lot of love between me and my ex. So I think that's a little bit different side of things that I think will serve some perspective here.
Well, I think it's important, Heather, as you just shared um, that there's two sides to the fence, right? And I think at the end of the day, I always say that, nobody steps into marriage, knowing that they're going to get divorced. We all step into that with the optimism of happily ever after, as they are your forever person. And so when divorce kind of creeps up on us, or the reality that that's going to be happening, it's that first feeling of just absolute denial and so many emotions. And I have found that when I went through the process of divorce, I just lost a part of myself. And I think part of divorce brings you back home to who you are, in that place. But I'm glad to get your perspective, because I think at the end of the day, as you're saying, you're at a place where there wasn't contention. That the core of any of this is we want the other person to be happy, right?
Yeah,
And to,
absolutely.
and to share your journey of how you've navigated that is important.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was always the biggest, there's pain and there's hurt. I don't want people to think that there wasn't that and that there still isn't. I mean, there is still pain and hurt sometimes around it. But I think what what I'd like to get across is that it can be done with a lot of love, and that there doesn't have to be contention everywhere if people can actually stop and take a look and start to look at their own truth. And if both parties can do that, I think it makes the process a little bit easier. And I know not everyone's going through that. Believe me, I understand. But it's just thinking through how you can be a little gentler to yourself, a little kinder to yourself and your partner, and what that can look like and how it can feel better. But I will talk a little bit about how, there was a lot of pain and still is, because my ex was very much a part of our family and very loved, and so that's a piece that we can talk through too, because that's you're also, when you're going through divorce, you're also affecting so many people around you, and there's a lot of shame and guilt and fear around that, and we can dive into that a little bit more. But I think, if you want to just jump in, we start asking some of the questions, your clients or audience have had. We can start there.
Yeah, let's do that, Heather. So yeah, Heather, let's just jump in and see where this goes, and let it take a life of its own a bit, because it's going to,
Yeah.
in the direction. So yeah, go. What's the first question that we have?
So the first question is, what parts of yourself did you have to divorce in order to truly separate from your partner?
Oh boy. Um, wow. I feel like the divorcing parts of ourselves probably never really ends. But I think if I go back 13 years ago, almost 14 years ago, in that process, I really wanted my partner to be what I needed them to be. Um, there were parts of me at that time that was very much people pleasing, making sure everything was operating the way it needed to be, at my detriment, not checking in with my emotional state. And so the parts that I had to divorce were the parts that I had very poor boundaries, not listening to what I needed emotionally, yet everything on paper looked good. Had the house, had the marriage, had the business, had the kids, the vacations and creating memories. But when there's that loneliness inside of yourself, the parts that I had to divorce were the parts that didn't allow me to be who I needed to be. And, I don't think we know who we are when we're 20 versus, finding out who you are takes time, and it takes evolution and change. And so from where I was when I got married, when I was 20, let's see, 29, um, to who I was at 39, I went through so many changes. I mean, heck, who I was at 20, it was a different version of who I am, even at 25. So when I look back at the parts that I had to let go of, it's like I was divorcing the people pleaser. I was divorcing the part of myself where I had to always be in a place of pain, because I was trying to extract the happiness and the joy from my marriage when it wasn't feeding me that. And I want to also state very clearly that as I'm talking about this spiritual divorce, I'm also talking about the responsibility that I stepped into, knowing that at the end of the day, it was solely up to me to find my happiness, with or without a partner, with my husband at the time or not. That we get so conditioned to making sure our partner is fulfilling our needs and meeting us where we're at, when we can't even do that for ourselves. And so you start to just, I was expecting more and needing more from my husband at the time on an emotional level, where I wasn't able to access that for myself. And when you go there, it gets a bit exhausting, because what you step into with the marriage is this idea of it being what you want it to be. Yet the reality of it is it changes so much as you change and grow as two individual people. And so the divorcing parts of myself, I think, still happens over time, as there's parts of ourselves that might show up angry, that might show up scared, that might show up with resentment. And all the anger and all the resentment is really just aspects of myself that I was in denial of not being in a relationship that nurtured me emotionally. Yet when I really look at that, Heather, that was my job to align with a relationship that aligned for me. That was my responsibility, uh, not my husband's.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I can relate completely to being someone at 26, 27, and then 20 years later, you're a completely different person. And I think you have, growing together. But I think one of the things that um, I thought a lot about, I thought love meant self-sacrifice, so that you have to sacrifice things but if you're not getting what you need and you're feeling like the relationship isn't serving you anymore, it's truth over sovereignty, right? So it's like I need to tell my truth, but then I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not doing what's right, because you don't want to hurt somebody, or you're in a marriage and you don't get divorced, and like all of those things. So it's like self-sacrifice. I'm like, well, I'll just stay where I am, because I did, like I said earlier, I did really love my ex, and we had a great relationship. And I think it's funny because a lot of people were like shocked that we were splitting up, and they were like, well, what, wait, you guys are like perfect. So it's that perfection that a lot of us show to the world, but you're suffering a little bit inside. You're sacrificing things for the relationship, when you really need to take a look at, what isn't serving you about the relationship anymore. And so looking at that, looking at yourself and saying what's true. I don't want to hurt anybody, but like I have to go back to myself.
Yeah, Heather. And when you talk about just right there that, everything looked okay, but there wasn't a part of you lining up with your own truth, like something was changing. And it made me just think about when you were sharing that our truths do change over time. Like we do change on a daily basis and certainly over months and years. So as our truths change, isn't it fair to say that our truths may change within a relationship of what we are wanting and needing? And it's interesting if we're not aware of our own truths changing of what we need personally because we don't check in with ourselves or take self care, how could our partners possibly know what we need? And then we're not really checking into what they need and what their truth is.
Yeah, and not being able to communicate and connect. That's something I think people struggle with. Like I didn't know how to communicate around what I needed or didn't need, because it was just almost like, just keep swimming. The Nemo, just keep swimming. You just keep going. And I didn't know how to finally hear myself and listen to myself, until someone said to me, I said, I'm really worried about my partner, my ex. I'm worried about leaving. I was very upset about the whole thing. And someone said, well, this is about you, and you need to look into yourself, and look about and listen to yourself, um, and like kind of get rid of all of the noise. And that what really was a turning point for me, where I was like, okay, I need to listen to myself, hear myself. Some people may ask, are you actually fully living the life you want to live or not? And so I did a lot of work about, listening to myself.
Did you find, Heather, that you listened to more people around you, let's just say family, listening to what others perhaps wanted for you or the
Mhm.
marriage versus listening to yourself? And did that influence part of perhaps how long you stayed in the marriage or making your own decision?
Yeah, I think so. I think, you always second guess, you talk to everybody, you ask everybody's opinion. What do you think? And then you get these opinions. And I think I did the same thing, just what should I do? How should I be feeling? And then when other people project how you should be feeling on you, it's confusing, and it can delay finding your own truth. And it's not that I don't want to listen to people, or like I know a lot of people have great opinions, but then you can get caught up in the swirling emotion of everybody else. And then you stop listening to yourself.
Yeah. And, because the truth of the matter is the truth is between you and your partner. And if we go even deeper than that, the truth is actually you in your
Yep.
relationship to that individual. And I think a lot of times when we involve people around us, I've said this before, that we're not only divorcing our partner, we're divorcing the family, we're divorcing the people connected to the marriage. And it's like we're divorcing an aspect and an identification of ourselves, which is just sometimes so overwhelming to look at, because you are literally starting over from scratch. And like you think, like, who the hell am I without this family, without these people that I have lived with and known for the last 20 plus years, 5 years, whatever it is. And so I think there has to be some credit given to not only the divorce itself of the individual, but the divorce of that life and everything it entails.
Yeah. Yeah. You're walking or stepping away from something that has been good and has been comfortable. And, for me anyway, there wasn't a lot of, fighting. It wasn't anything that I can point to. It was just more looking at what wasn't the relationship that wasn't serving me or him. Like it's not just about me. You're in a relationship with two people, but there was the way I was behaving because I was unhappy was also affecting him. So if you think about, like, I want to take responsibility and accountability. Like, I was not happy. I had truths inside me that I wasn't able to share, and then it really made him, you know, his reaction to me. Like, I was definitely a part of the divorce and the relationship coming to an end. And I didn't want to blame him, but there was a lot going on inside of me, and then the way I behaved sometimes was ridiculous, and it wasn't serving him. And it's like, I understand the reaction from him to me. So you have to both take a look at who you are in the relationship, and I take a lot of responsibility and accountability for my own behavior.
Well, when you talk about that ridiculous behavior, Heather, that you were witnessing in yourself, where was that? Where's the root system of that for you when you were going through it? Like, what do you think was the cause of that for you, or the foundation of that behavior?
I would have to say fear.
Mm-hmm.
I was fearful of so many things. I was fearful of how I was feeling. Like, why am I feeling this way? I was fearful of the repercussions of what divorce could mean for me and for him and for my and our extended family. We were all super close. I was fearful of, hurting someone I really loved. I had fear around that because I didn't want to hurt anybody. And so there's just this everything and I sat in fear for a while, for a long time, and I couldn't move. And I almost, I was like paralyzed in this fear around making any decisions or doing anything one way or the other. Um, because, it's also confusing because there's just a lot of good times, a lot of laughter. And so you're like grappling with that, your truth, but you're so fearful to move, that you sit and you stay and you try to work it out and you try to make things better. And but I think I came to a realization that this was good for me and potentially good for him in the long run, and that hopefully that we would stay connected and be friends and have a relationship outside of outside of the marriage. And we're proving that today. And I think it's a beautiful thing that we can still talk to each other and we still communicate, and the family still talks to him, and we are going through that. But it's like, it's a deliberate decision too. Like, it's a deliberate decision.
Yeah, and I mean, you bring up an interesting point, that there's parts of the relationship that I think anybody who's gone through a divorce and has been in a marriage, it's like it's like the good photos that you want to keep, right? Like metaphoric photos of the relationship you want to keep. It's of that trip that you've taken, and is it okay to be honest to say there were some good times? And it's almost as though that you're not allowed to say it when there's so much pain, you can't hold on to the memories that you've had out of fear of hurting maybe your current partner, or that you don't want to disrespect somebody else because, what would they think? Are you still holding on to that? But I think there's a way to honor the relationship in the good parts, because you have to, because then you're denying the good parts of yourself that contributed to those memories. And so there's got to be a sense of permission that we say, I can really hold on to these good things and still accept the fact that we've changed. It's almost as though we go through, I just wrote this down, Heather, like the denial divorce.
Yeah.
Like we are sitting in this, like this preemptive, um, the pre-divorce. It's called the denial divorce. And I think so many of us have to sit there because it's so scary to figure out who you are outside of a marriage you may have been in for 20 plus years, because when you entered that marriage you were just a different version of yourself than you are today, and we don't have the freedom to really know who we want to be or who we can be, because we're kind of in survival, coming out of a relationship and a marriage where there's so much pain and so much time that we have not allowed ourselves to live. And so I feel like there's so much time to catch up, and like, what do we need to do? Heather, when I got into this work, I came up with this process working with a client that allowed me to give a sense of idea around the health of our relationship. And I call it the 5 points of the relationship house. And I'll always bring my hands together. And anybody who works with me has seen this. And what I came up with was this, that if you put your hands together, and so every fingertip is pointed, they're touching each other, you have physical connection with your partner on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, 1 not being that much. Do you physically like to be with your person? The next touch point of that house, on the fingers touching, would be sexual intimacy. Do you have safe, compatible sexual intimacy, and whatever that looks like for you as a couple on a scale of 1 to 10? And then the roof of the house, the very important point of the house, is the emotional connection. On a scale of 1 to 10, do you feel seen and heard by your partner? Do you see and hear your partner? That emotional connection is the very top and the roof of your house. How well is that built? So the elements don't come in. And then the next part of that roof line is your mental connection. Do we respectfully listen to one another? Do we challenge one another? And if we do disagree, we respectfully disagree. Do we challenge one another? Do we have the same values? On a scale of 1 to 10, where does that fall? And again, that's the top of your roof as well. And then we have spiritual connection. And that can simply be, somebody may be, non-faith based and they like to hike in the woods. Somebody might be Jewish, or someone might be Catholic. Whatever their religious or spiritual beliefs are, they could be atheist, and somebody could be, Buddhist. We just respect each other's journey, whatever that is. But in order to come together physically, sexually, mentally, and spiritually, we have to know that we emotionally connect with our individual, because if we don't feel safe emotionally and really being seen and heard in a safe way, the last thing I want to do is be intimate or hang out with you. And so this 5 point of the house system that I do really allows you to get clear on what's going on in the relationship and how you're showing up to it, and perhaps how your partner is. And it's a great thing I like to do with couples, to kind of take a look, but it helps us keep us in check and to see what's happening.
Hmm. Yeah. And, you taught me that a long time ago. And it's a great way. It's a great visual. It's a great way to really, evaluate like where you're at with your partner. And I think it's one of the absolutely like the one of the biggest things you've taught me, is to really look at that. And I think, going and looking at that, and anyone who's sitting listening and thinking about like their own relationships, like to just do that and see where you land and see where you fall. I recently did this, shared it with a friend of mine, and it was like a little bit shocking to her. It was like, oh well, yeah, we don't line up emotionally. Well, we definitely don't, have a sexual relationship, and yeah, we're not at all compatible with religion. And like, you start to be like, oh, wow, okay, we're not connecting.
So what
The-
sticks it together?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we're not connecting. And I think people want to make excuses for everything. Well, we're just going through a rough patch. But when you start to look at it that way and all those five things come together, you can start to evaluate, like, where are you really, and what does it mean? And can you start to talk about that with your partner and maybe pair it as well? I mean, it's not like, if you're not showing up for each other emotionally, what are the things you can do to kind of look at that?
Yeah, and it's it's kind of it's vulnerable, it's revealing, um, and it's honest actually, because I would much rather, instead of going through a spiritual divorce, I'd rather step into an emotional marriage first. It's not about the things that we have, it's not about the car or the job. I mean, those things are great for security, but if we're not feeling emotionally safe within the relationship, we're not feeling really motivated to go work, or to create a happy home, or to go do things with our partner, or want to collaborate on things on a mental level. And so, really getting honest, if we are emotionally connecting with our partner, it creates such a richness. And if I look back on my marriage, we had the things based on what we knew then, right?
Mm.
My ex and I did the best we could. Neither one of us went into that marriage thinking we were going to get divorced, have three kids, and then, 15 years later, call it quits. And I think that anger that I was feeling in that divorce was just so much a part of me denying the change that I was going through as my truths changed for myself, that I wanted to have a bigger voice within the marriage, that Anne wanted more. And maybe I wanted a deeper emotional connection with my husband at the time, in a way that when we first entered the relationship, that wasn't always present, but other things were fine. We would take adventures and trips and do things, but I didn't know then how much today an emotional connection and feeling safe in the way of being seen and heard, and kindness, and compassion, and having deep conversations matters to the 50-year-old Anne today versus the 25-year-old, Anne then. And this is where the honesty comes in, that we have to be willing to look at where we are today and be willing to pivot and have honest conversations with our person and ourselves. And also, I want to add to that, it's so important to be able to have those honest conversations, but find people that are willing to sit in that place with you and just listen, and not be afraid to hear your truths. Because if we're around those people that are suppressing your truth or not open to that, most likely there's some work that needs to be done in those relationships that you're connected to. And so this really blows the door wide open to all of our relationships and reevaluating what aligns for us and aligns for our highest. Can it be scary? Yes. Somebody very important to me, he used the term necessary pain. He said it's kind of like you got a splinter in there and it's so painful, but the minute you pull it out, it's like instant relief. And we have to go through this necessary pain to get to the other side of that relief, to start over.
Yeah, and let's go to another question that kind of is along those lines. This question is, how can we honor the version of ourselves that stayed too long while still choosing to evolve beyond them? So, one thing, I'll just start. I'll
Yeah.
start. I'll just dive in. One thing is, like, I had to learn how to, like, let go of the guilt, and to stop blaming myself. And the emotion was very raw around this, and maybe a lot of people don't know that, but it was right there, right up in my chest. Like, every time I thought about my ex or talked about him, I wanted to cry. It was such a raw emotional, and I'm like, because I was blaming myself for everything, and I didn't know how to let go of that. This is my fault. I feel so guilty. I've ruined people's lives. Like, what have I done? And so it was very raw, and I did a lot of work, and I can say this now, like, probably a couple months ago I'd be in tears right now, because it was so right there because I had to let go and stop blaming myself for every single thing. And now I can talk about it and with love because, like I said, my ex, I do love him very much and we're going to be friends, I hope forever. But I was feeling so much guilt and blaming myself that I did this, I've ruined everything. And once I let go of that, the tears and the emotional pain started to dissipate.
Yeah, that's powerful, Heather. And you know, it speaks to also how do we move on but still honor the relationship? How do we move on and find some type of acceptance that this can be your ex? Because I know I've watched you journey with this and I know what that relationship meant to you and does today. And it's not even about the marriage that I see within you that you were in, but it's the relationship you had with this other human being. You
That's right.
know, we tend to clear the table with the word divorce, and I think that just removes so much that was also so good. And
That's right.
can we find that place in between where we can appreciate the person? Because I think we started the race with this person for reasons of appreciation and wanting to be with them,
Mhm.
and we get to this place of like you don't even know who they are, but really if we look at that it's because we lost who we were but yet we want to put it on them. And so it's like this radical ownership going through a divorce, to answer your question, Heather, and to tag onto what you just said, that I stayed as long as I did because I didn't want to give up. I didn't want to let go of what I entered into at the time was really good for me at the time. And so when we come out of divorce, it's not about my ex. It's so much about forgiving myself for not having the courage to have the honesty about where I was and what I was feeling. And it's like this emotional check in should be mandatory for every marriage. Like there should be emotional check ins annually or every 6 months. Like, hey, how are things? Where are you at? Anything we want to talk about, you want to be curious about. It should just be mandatory. And maybe we do that before we get legally married. But um, you know, it's being able to move on and forgive ourselves, as you use that term, staying longer than we should have. Boy, do we sit with that one. Because what if we left 5 years sooner or 10 years? Did we step into a marriage for some people that knew that they never should have been married? That's a whole nother discussion because it seemed good enough. It checked a couple boxes that seemed right or that our family liked. But deep down inside, when you know yourself in the way that you know yourself today, in the way that I know myself, there's so many things we would have done differently. And that's not to disparage the person that we were with, because at the time, that's who we were supposed to be aligned with for where we were at.
Mhm.
Um, so I appreciate what you're saying, Heather. And I think there has to be some more acceptance about creating a happy medium and acceptance for honoring the relationship, because those are parts of yourself that were in a good space. And by deleting all of that, it's just saying that we weren't good to be there. We weren't enough, and we were. We just have changed.
Yeah, and I think the word change is interesting because, when I started to feel myself changing, it's painful. And you're like, wait, no, I like things the way they are. Why am I feeling different? What do I need differently out of this relationship? Why am I feeling change? I don't want to change. Everybody knows change is hard. And it's like a painful thing to look at. I remember like pushing it down, being like, okay, chill, Heather. You're good. You're good where you are. But actually, it kept like coming back up and it kept coming back up. And you're like feeling it in your gut. And you're like, okay. And I think everybody knows their own truth. They just don't want to reveal the truth. Like I think it sits inside of you, and there's things that that you just like, if that came out, this will, blow up my life. And I was comfortable in my life. Like I said, we were besties. We were best friends. We did everything together. We laughed together. It was all of this, but there was just something else that was missing for me, that I just knew that I wasn't going to be the best of myself to give to him anymore. And that's when, you know, things started to change in our relationship. But I am taking accountability for that. And I felt the change. And he may have too, but I can't speak for him. I'm just saying, like, that's hard. It's hard when you know the truth and you don't say it. And so the word change is interesting because I think people start to feel a shift in themselves as they grow. I'm not who I was when I was 27, although I wish I was because I had a lot of fun back then. You know, it was a
No,
lot.
right?
It was fun, but
Yeah.
I'm just, and it's just not who I am anymore. And I just have to embrace the truth and again, stop blaming myself and understand change happens and growth happens and being honest
Yeah.
about it.
You bring up the word blowing up, it's such a term that you'll hear like, okay, I'm going to blow up my life, but it's like you can blow up your life and rebuild, or you can continuously silently blow up yourself every day. And at what point do we feel like that's what we're worth? Right.
Mhm.
And also giving our partners the opportunity to let them know who they're aligned with. It's that courage again to get really honest. And you talked about guilt, Heather, like, oh my gosh, like the guilt of how's this going to affect the kids? Because I have 3 children with my ex and, what I put them through. But also, I always tell everybody that um, I'm going to share a very quick story that's someone very important to me when I was going through my divorce. We had some friends coming to visit from England. And before they left, I went to lunch, and her name is Maria. And they came for the whole weekend, and the tension was terrible, and I was trying to hide it. I was trying to just make sure they had a good trip. They were here, they're leaving to go back, and they're just dear friends of ours. Her and I went to lunch, and she shared this story with me, and I didn't see it coming, and because I'm trying to be stoic and just the whole thing for the weekend. And she said, I want to share a story with you. And she said, she had gone through a divorce with her first husband and they had children. And she says, one day I was in a candy store a year after my divorce, and her son went up. She was with her son, who was still young at the time. And she was down one of the aisles in the store. I think it was a candy store. And she overheard the store owner saying, oh, hello, lad, because they're from England. How are mom and dad doing? And the son says, oh, sir, they got divorced. And my friend Maria's like heart just sank. And she felt this dread and this shame, as we've all felt when you're going through it. Like you just want to put a big signpost up saying, going through divorce, leave me alone. There's nothing, dramatic, just pass on by. And so she's standing in the aisle and she's sharing this with me. And then all of a sudden, her son said to the store owner, oh, it's okay, sir, because my mom's really happy now. She's happy all the time. And when my friend Maria said this to me, I just broke down in tears. Like I just lost it in front of her because it was what I needed to hear in that one moment. In that one moment, Heather, that um, the reason that she had to go through her own pain is the gift that she had given her kids to be who she truly needed to be and to find her happiness. And that was not about who she was married to's job to make her happy. It was for her to find the courage to see herself, to know that in order to be happy, the marriage had to outrun the time for her. She had changed through it. And so when she told me that, and she told me that her kids witnessed that, it's what I needed to hear, because I thought I was damaging my kids. Like, what am I doing pulling the family apart?
Mm.
But it really sat with me that the greatest gift we can give our children is to show them that we are happy and to show them healthy love. Even if that means letting go of what we have, to go find ourselves and to recreate that. And that started my journey. So it was just powerful. And the teachers that come upon your path to kind of show you your truth.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting around the sign, putting up the sign like "Leave me alone." One of the things that I thought was really fascinating going through my divorce was everybody I encountered wanted to know whose fault it was.
Yes.
Who did it? Who did what?
Right.
Whose fault is it? Like, and every time someone says what happened, like who did that? What did you do to him or he do to you? And it was very interesting to me because we all want to blame someone. It's got to be someone's fault. Someone did something. And like really like every time I answer that question, I try to tie it back to like things just between us were not working out and we wanted different things or I wanted something different. And again, I can't speak for him, but you see so often people wanting to blame someone and no one takes accountability for it. But like, what do you think that is? Like, how do you in society, everyone wants to know who did it, like who's who to blame?
Yeah, Heather, let's talk about the energy of blame, especially when it comes down to the breakdown of a marriage and what's at the core of that blame. It's really about where ego steps in and, somebody's got to be right, so you're wrong, right? It's about placing that onus on somebody else without going inward to ourselves to see how we contributed to that. We can look at an example such as, let's say, addiction or an affair. If we look at addiction, we want to blame the addict. We can't blame the addict without looking at ourselves for staying with that energy. We choose to stay, but yet we want to continue to blame the individual year after year after year. But what's our responsibility in that for ourselves? We could look at an affair, want to blame the affair and blame the third party. But what's our part in that, in the relationship as a whole, where one of you stopped showing up and the other person didn't have the courage to say, hey, you feel distant? So that takes two people. It takes two people to take a look at that, to say, how did that happen? And have the courage to have that conversation. But that can only come with this emotional connection that is so deeply important in a relationship. As I always say, life's not happening to you, but because of you. And we are exactly where we are today because of our choices, because of how we choose to show up. And we have an opportunity every single day to show up completely to our partners and challenge ourselves to show up in ways that we haven't before. But it gets very comfortable to just want to throw blame, right, Heather? And so we have to take a look at it when blame does come up. What is it showing us? What is it trying to teach us? And it can be really hard to look at it that way, but we are where we're at because of our choices and taking some responsibility to see what led us to be where we are right now. Right. All right. What's next, Heather?
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Let's see. There's so many here. Let me just pick one. Okay, so this is something that's always been in the news. I think a celebrity said consciously uncoupling. So, what does it mean to consciously uncouple? I think it was Gwyneth Paltrow, actually. Not just from the person, but from a pattern, a story, or an outdated belief. What does it mean to consciously uncouple from that person, a pattern, or a story, or an outdated belief?
I mean, honestly, Heather, when I hear that, I remember when she had coined that term, and it's like at the time I'm like, okay, whatever, because I was not going through an unconscious uncoupling. I was going through a tornado, okay,
Yeah.
and I'm like, sure. But if I look at it now, to be honest, you're consciously uncoupling from yourself within that relationship. Every single thing we look at, whether it's in a relationship in your marriage, at your work, with your family, you got to line up with your own patterns. You got to line up with your own truth. You got to line up with how you wake up every day and you step into your life with honesty. Your partner is just the symptom, right? They are not the problem. We are the problem. And if we really understand that, we have to take radical accountability to say, if I'm not happy, what is it that I need to be happy? And first, I'm going to go to my partner to be like, listen, these are the things that I'm needing because things have changed. And I want to hold space if you want to line up with that. I want you to know where I'm at, because if our partners don't have our blueprints and don't know that we have changed, then we haven't given them the opportunity to say, hey, let me catch up. I want to be a part of that journey with you. We have to start there first. But until we're honest with ourselves, how can we possibly go to our partners to say, this is what I need? Mm-hmm. So that that conscious uncoupling is really about you. And then the residual effect of that is the actual the marriage itself, whether it dissolves or it stays together. But it's really about detaching from your old patterns, and your patterns of not feeling worthy, of people pleasing, of choosing to stay in a place of being, I guess, the victim. And I guess when I say victim, it's about as I always share with everyone, and well, I share with those that I work with and people close to me, that if life's not happening to us, but because of us, you know, how do we become aware that we are always in the driver's seat of our decisions, and that it's so easy to put the blame on somebody else? And so that means our power is given to somebody else at all times, when we have to take that power back. And that can feel a little like overwhelming and kind of like, because we might have been shown that it's somebody else's fault through our own childhood. We might have been shown in our home with our parents that it's dad's fault or mom's fault. But when we start taking accountability for our own actions and how we show up, then we can truly be in a relationship where you're both showing up honestly and doing your part together and also individually.
Yeah, and what came to mind, it's so funny. I was thinking about, stop asking, like, why did they do this to me?
Right.
Like, a lot of people, like, they did this to me, or like he did this to me, or she did this to me. And like letting go of the stories that you don't know, you no longer really need to carry. You're creating the story of someone did something to you. And when you said that, it like resonated so much around, like, it's not happening to you. No one did anything to you. Um, or stop asking those questions why. You might feel that way, like, he did this to me and that made me change, and that, but really just taking full accountability and looking at yourself. Like, I look at myself, I'm like, I am the one that changed a lot, and I believe he changed a lot too throughout, the course of our marriage. But we don't have to carry the stories anymore, and you don't have to tell people the stories to make yourself feel better. Right. So like, it's like, he did this and that's why we broke up. Or I did this and that's, it's like letting go of that story that keeps you in the guilt and the non-truth.
Right, because we're just going to attract that again. Because when we have the stories, then we're essentially hiding behind the stories and not the reason for why it needs to just fall apart. And so as you are talking about carrying the stories keep us safe, right? Because the
Mm-hmm.
stories mean it's about somebody else and not our own doing. And
Mm-hmm.
as I say, life's not happening to you, but because of you. If we are aligned with an individual that can't show up for us emotionally, and you just every day hope that they do, who is that on? Right? If we met that person, they were never really emotionally available to begin with, it's who you married. What we have to look up and look at is, why did we choose to stay? And then we get caught up in feeling guilty that we did. But I think you have to be so gentle with yourself, that I feel like in the course of a relationship, I always say, you know more about yourself in relationship than you do out. So, how about we give ourselves some time and grace and compassion and understanding to grow up within a relationship, and allow each other to grow up within a relationship, and say, hey, who I was 10 years ago is a bit different today, but I respect you, I love you, and let's look at all the memories we had. So, again, the story piece can get exhausting, because at the end of the day, how does that story serve you today? It doesn't. Like, I want to know who you are today and what you've done to step forward and what you've taken and learned from that, um, with compassion, with kindness, and with intention.
Yep. Love it. And I think we have to wrap, because
Yeah.
there's like 10 more questions on this page.
Well, we might have to do a part two.
Part two. Yeah. And maybe we bring someone else in that has had a different experience
Yeah.
than both of us, right? Like, mine was more, a little less. What did you say? You were in a tornado?
Yeah, I was in a tornado, lady.
I was in a mini tornado. You might have been in a bigger tornado, but it might be interesting to hear from other people on this topic. So appreciate getting honest and talking through this kind of stuff, and being able to tell my truth.
I love that. And removing the silence from it, and having a really honest conversation, and allowing other people to have honest conversations about that, and inviting that. So Heather, I love going there with you. I love our conversations. For everybody who's listening, we just went there and riffed today. And it's coming from a place of our experience, and hopefully we will have more of these conversations, as I think they're important. And just so glad that you're here to listen in. And Heather, so glad you're here today. Thank you for sitting in and having this conversation around the spiritual divorce.
Thanks, Anne.
Take care.
Take care.